Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and in today's video, I'm gonna be taking a look at the latest release in the Little Book lineup from Jim Beam. This is Chapter 8, titled Path Not Taken, bottled at 118.2 proof or 59.1% ABV. It's a blend of 4 to 11 year rye whiskeys with some 18-year-old high rye bourbon in the mix as well. We don't know the exact proportions of those components, but I'll drop all the information that I have about this release in the description of this video. Hit that like button while you're at it. And very quickly, I do have to say thank you to a super generous Patreon supporter, Jeremy H, for sending this sample my way. And I guess I should kind of preface this entire video by saying, Little Book, while it is the experimental lineup from Jim Beam, and they take some chances on this, it's beautifully presented in that Booker style box. It does command a premium price, 140 SRP, about 200 on secondary. I have to say, I've never really found a Little Book that I've been crazy about besides Chapter 3. Now, I think Chapter 3 was the least experimental. There was no brown rice whiskey in there. There was no, applewood toasted this or that. It was straightforward. It was a lot of their small batch bourbons, decent age statements on those blended together. It was just fantastic stuff. And that makes sense because I'm a huge fan of highly aged Jim Beam bourbon. I love the Booker's Rye, the Overholt Ryes that are dropping now. Jim Beam with age on it is fantastic. The younger stuff I'm not the biggest fan of. And I'm finding out that a lot of this experimental stuff is not quite doing it for me as well. But look, this is the first opportunity I've had to review a Little Book on the channel like this. It's a lot of rye whiskey. I think 2024 is the year of the rye whiskey. There's so much great rye hitting shelves right now. And so if there's ever a time to get into a Little Book and hopefully find one that I like, I'm hoping this Chapter 8 is it. So let's check it out now on the nose and see what we get. All right, so there's a lot going on in this whiskey. It's super complex. There are a lot of layers, and I think the best way for me to break this down is to kind of talk first about the notes that really jump out of the glass and smack me in the face, and then dig beneath those and talk about all those complexities and things underneath. Unfortunately for this whiskey, the things that smack me in the face right away are those notes that I'm not the biggest fan of. There's a lot of dill. It's super herbal, very citrusy, which I like citrus. I like these ginger snap and gingerbread notes that I'm getting as well. But the spearminty, herbal, dill notes that are so prevalent in here, I have a little bit of a hard time with those. It reminds me of super young, like 4-year MGP 95.5 rye. So I think overall, the first impression of this whiskey is that I'm not the biggest fan of the nose right away, but it's very obvious to me that there are layers to this, and I'm picking up on a lot of things upon first nosing. So we're gonna dig a little bit deeper. I'm gonna reserve my judgment until I spend a little bit more time with this. So back to the nose now. All right, so underneath all of those very rye-forward characteristics, I am picking up on some beautiful like tobacco notes, and that's something that kind of defies what seems to be the average age of this whiskey. Like it feels like a younger rye overall, but then you get this tobacco note in the background that reminds me of very highly aged Jim Beam stuff. So I do love that aspect to it. There's this great, on the opposite side of things, this great vanilla note sitting on the top of the whiskey. Sweet, creamy, light, decadent vanilla. I love that aspect of this as well. Now, the kind of backbone that this whiskey has reminds me of that A. Overholt Monongahela mash, that 95 proofer that came out earlier this year, about 40 bucks, great value rye. I love that stuff. This has that kind of, that malty backbone, textured maltiness, chocolate, pineapple note that I got from that Monongahela mash. So I do appreciate that as well. And then finally, there is just a rich caramel note. You get this on every single Jim Beam product. It doesn't matter if it's a rye, it's a bourbon. They all have this caramel backbone. I would say it reminds me a little bit of like this cinnamon roll, caramelized, vanilla icing kind of profile that provides a backbone to all of those very young-ish rye forward notes that I'm not the biggest fan of. You take the good with the bad, and in this case, I really do sincerely appreciate the complexity of this whiskey. There's a lot of different components in the mix. It's clear to me that there's mostly rye and very, very heavy rye in the mix. But the fact that they were able to achieve this complexity with this blend, I would say is very impressive, even if it's subjectively not my favorite profile. So with that said, let's get this on the palate now. Cheers. This is very aggressive on the front of the palate with those rye notes. It's actually a little bit soapy to me in some ways. That soapy kind of note plays in with the ginger snap, gingerbread, spearmint kind of quality, those brighter, mintier herbal qualities. That soapiness adds this slightly bitter touch to those. I usually am not a big fan of that kind of soapy note in a whiskey. That happens a lot of times in very intense ryes, similar to this. And I think in this case, I'm still not the biggest fan of it. But again, It's complex, it's herbal, it's got this salinity, this saltiness to it as well, kind of like that sea spray note that you get on coastal scotches. So, I mean, this ticks a lot of boxes. And if you want to sit with the whiskey that's going to give you layer after layer, you really can't go wrong with this. You just have to understand that if you're not a fan of like Willett Family Estate, 4-year rye, small batch, that 105 proofer kind of rye, or young MGP ryes and stuff like that, you're probably not gonna like this whiskey. But if you are okay with those notes and you want to, I guess, appreciate something that's complex and nerd out about it, I would say this is a good whiskey for you. I think this is like an academic whiskey. It feels like an academic exercise, similar to some old Carters. They can feel this way too, where the blending almost feels like you're trying to show off. And maybe they are. Like I don't know what the thought process is when they go in to blend these little books. And I'm not trying to infer anything beyond, but this does feel a little academic. Like you could sit with this and study it for an hour and continue to find new things. So let's go back to the palate now. As you continue to sip this whiskey, you do acclimate to those notes that I'm not the biggest fan of. This gets deeper, richer, darker, more caramelized, and I'm enjoying it more and more. So it's one of those things where if you invest the time in the whiskey and you allow yourself to acclimate to it, I think you can reap the benefits of that. I don't know where I stand with it. This is a tough review to make because there's so much about it that I'm like, I don't know. The price point, $140, and you get this kind of a profile with these kind of top notes, then you get below it and you go, all right, $140 for a really complex, once a year release, something totally different. Like I've never had a whiskey from Jim Beam that tastes like this. So A+ for uniqueness and experimentation and all of that. I don't know where to put this. So I really would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. If you've had the chance to try this whiskey, let me know what you think. I'm gonna revisit this comment section. I think it's good, You just gotta get past a couple of these things if those notes are not quite for you. So let's do one final sip and then we're gonna wrap this up. Third sip, even better. More of this malty, dark honey backbone and chocolate and tobacco and leather starting to come out of this. Whereas all those brighter notes are starting to really take a back seat. And again, those brighter notes to me are sitting on my tongue as kind of like a punctuation to those darker notes, whereas before they were the star of the show and the darker notes were much more in the background. So this is an ever-evolving, ever-changing whiskey in the glass and on the palate. I appreciate that from Jim Beam. I would say do not pay over retail or SRP for this, $140. But if these notes that I'm talking about and these profiles and styles of whiskeys that I'm not the biggest fan of, if they're in your wheelhouse, then I think this is something that you should absolutely go pick up. If you're like me though, and this is not your favorite whiskey, I would say you could probably skip this one. And if you like that kind of more bourbon influenced, sweeter, less abrasive kind of profile, maybe you go pick up the Knob Creek 10-year rye, which I think is a great rye. Doesn't even really taste like a rye, but I think it's good whiskey nonetheless, around $60. And I think you could pass up on this. So this review is challenging. It's a little all over the place. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, subscribe, check out the Patreon for some upcoming barrel picks and exclusive content. That's gonna do it. Cheers. Thank you, Jeremy, for this sample, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.